All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside Analysis, the only coast-to-coast radio show here in the US of A, all about the information economy. And folks, I'm back in Austin, Texas, ATX, my favorite town in the world, tied with New Orleans, I guess. But fantastic town. I love this place. And I'm at the haunt of a good friend of mine, a company called Zilliant. We've got Pete Eppley here, Senior Vice President of Products and Science. And he's going to educate us on what Zilliant does and what a crucial role you folks are playing these days, especially in pricing, because pricing is always the hardest part in business, figuring out what to charge. Do you charge too much? Growing up, we used to always watch The Price is Right. And what do you learn on The Price is Right? If you go too high,
You're going to lose.
you lose the sale. You don't get anything, but you can't go too low either, or you lose your margin or you lose your hat. Obviously, if it gets too dicey. And with inflation these days, I mean, that's got to be a huge driver for your business. So maybe give us a sort of overview of what Zilliant does. I know you help with pricing. You got a bunch of different products that are really good in that space, but just give our audience a quick overview of Zilliant, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, perfect. So on the pricing side, we help really with the whole gamut of pricing within business to business. And that goes anywhere from setting a list price for a product or standard discounts, because you may give a better price to a large customer than a small customer. Goes all the way down from that through helping support negotiation with your biggest customers and managing their contracts, and then being able to execute those prices over multi-channel. That's one of the big changes that we've seen, is that people now are selling not just through sales reps like they've done for decades now, but also selling through e-commerce and other channels, marketplaces and things. And then we also have, in addition to the pricing technology, we also have revenue technology, where we take that same kind of scientific approach, built out and focusing on helping people grow their top line as well, keep customers, grow their customers, make sure customers are living up to what they committed volume wise and all that kind of thing. And those solutions work together well to really help people drive profitable growth.
Yeah, and we mentioned inflation, and we were talking before we hit the record button here about, if you come up with a contract, you agree to sell these bottles of water for $1 a piece. Well, then the price goes up because maybe gas prices went up, transportation prices go up. If you don't have that float baked into your contracts, now you've got a pretty dicey situation, because you got to be able to manage and figure out, what are we going to do? We can't lose money on this contract or that contract. So maybe walk us through some of the dynamic contract stuff you have, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because it builds in flexibility, so it protects you from these kinds of dynamic movements. And we've seen in some of the recent stock market and let's say the FTX environment, things can get very disrupted very quickly, and that can be very unpleasant. So you have some really interesting technology for managing dynamic contracts. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you really nailed it, which is that we're seeing a confluence of a couple of things coming together. First of all, there's a push towards being able to do commerce online and digitally. Everybody wants to move and become more frictionless. And so what that causes a lot of times, especially in a B2B scenario, is that people want to get a contracted price. They just want to get a price where I can buy a bottle of water or any other item that I might from you. And I get that in place. So I do. What happens then is, and we've been living in an environment of relatively stable inflation for years,
Right?
Frankly. And so nobody really expects the idea that I might be subject to 3, 4, 5 different inflationary increases in my cost per year. And so a lot of companies really aren't in a position where they're able to react and respond quickly to that kind of a pressure. And so what we found is, the typical, and we kind of joke about it, but it's true, the tools of the trade are that you get a group of pricing people, and they have Excel, they have email in their swivel chair, and you're basically telling them, hey,
Right.
your job is to go protect our margin across 50, 60% of our business, because we have fixed price contracts that aren't moving. And so what we found is that, with pricing, having tools that are really built and dedicated around being able to gather all the data and information that you need about what's changing in your market, being able to see and digitize the maybe tens of thousands of contracts that you have across different customers, getting that all into a place where it can be sort of quickly and easily, you can assess what is what's going on in the market, what am I seeing in terms of my increase in costs, and then start to drive the process of updates to those agreements is important. Because
Mhm.
some agreements you could just change at will, other ones you need to have a discussion with the customer. It could be very complicated process. So sometimes it's a matter of just pricing people making changes. Sometimes it's a matter of a pricing group in a back office, if you will, collaborating with the front office account managers or sales reps to drive changes through to their to the customers that they own.
Well, and your technology is sort of cataloging all these contracts and then giving some intelligence to the group about what to do and how to do it. Is that right? Is it like suggestions basically, or how does
That's
it work?
exactly right. That's exactly right. Because we're very scientific in our nature and very data driven, and pricing, as you could imagine, is a very data driven discipline. And so where guidance might have come before in terms of a finance department saying, hey, the price of X is increasing by 3%, go try to get 3% from your customers.
Right.
There used to be very blanket guidance for people. Now what we're able to do with these more sophisticated tools is become much more prescriptive about exactly what kind of price changes we might want to get from different customers. So, for instance, if I potentially I negotiated a lower than market price with a customer when they started with me and when I wrote the agreement, if I have an increase in costs, there's maybe an opportunity to start to get them move more toward a market price there. So I might want to go more than 3% in that case. There might be other cases where I've got a contract that's actually a bit above market. And if I try to get the whole 3% to my customer, I could be in risk of losing that customer. And so rather than what traditionally has been done in B2B pricing, which is a lot of big across the board, one size fits all moves, because it's frankly just been so hard to try to execute any change. Now with a dedicated tool set, people can understand where each customer stands on the pricing side, how they benchmark to where they should be in the market, and then make smarter decisions customer by customer about how, when, and where to pass through any kind of inflationary cost adjustments.
Yeah, right. And real core to your technology and your vision and the architecture is this whole pricing elasticity concept, right? So, and if I understand it correctly, when you work with a client, you will ingest their data, their product data, their sales data, their revenue data, any kind of data source that they can provide you. You can absorb that and then do some elasticity on the pricing. Say, okay, this widget could go anywhere from $3 to $7, depending upon market dynamics. What's your chance of losing the sale if you go too high? Can you kind of talk about the science behind that? Because I know it gets pretty technically challenging and algorithmic, but what actually happens and what's the end result for the customer?
Yeah, it's a great question. This is technology that we've been developing literally for a couple of decades now. With the elasticity, you nailed it exactly, which is that you want to try to understand for a change in price, what is going to be the change in quantity or the change in opportunity of winning a deal that you have with a customer. And elasticity can be looked at in a lot of different ways. You could think about yourself in terms of change in price relative, where do I need to position myself relative to my competitors as an example, or just my price overall in the market. And at a very high level, the way that we do that is by, as you mentioned, ingesting data and looking at long-term trends in the marketplace to understand, where are there consistently opportunities for me to get more price, or where, when I try to get more price, am I starting to lose significant business?
Right.
And one of the things that sets up well in a B2B environment for elasticity is, data scientists in general, they want data, they want experiments, so they want, information that's going to help them understand, if I did this, if I did that. Well, in a B2B environment, it turns out that there's so much negotiation for the same products to different customers that you're almost running an experiment in your business without even realizing it as
That's interesting.
Sales reps start to negotiate. So you can take and harness that information with machine learning and artificial intelligence to be able to understand what's going on and where there is real resistance to price moves, or maybe there's an opportunity to move price a little bit more because it's less elastic.
Well, and what's so cool here is that, especially start dealing with environments where you have thousands and even tens of thousands of products, or even just hundreds of products across 20, 50, 80 salespeople, different regions, et cetera. If you're a small company, you can do a lot of this stuff on your own and manually, Excel spreadsheets, et cetera. You get past a certain point, it's over. Like you can't do that. You're not going to be able to really ascertain what's happening. So it's very valuable to have this technology in the background, cataloging all this, capturing all this information, and then allowing you, I'm sure, this interactive experience where you can kind of look and see, all right, well, when we pushed it up over 10%, that's when sales really went down. We lost our margin. We weren't able to even keep this product rolling. That's the kind of value you can get by using this technology, right? Because you're always tracking where the sales go, what the margin was, what the prices are going into all this stuff. So that sort of compendium of content really gives you visibility into what's possible, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's a tremendous opportunity to be able to automate as well, because like you said, there's so much data that's coming in already. Plus, there's additional data now that's available that hasn't been before, just because of what's going on online. As an example, machine learning and artificial intelligence is moving faster. I mean, anybody who's not really taking advantage of all of those things runs the risk of falling behind. If you think about an Amazon as an example, which has traditionally been a retail and a B2C player, they've squarely through the last several years moved into the B2B and distribution space. And there's the war that they wage, so to speak, is always an information war in terms of how do I take every piece of information I have and be able to turn that into a better buying experience for my customer, to be able to draw them in and have them buy more from me. And that's essentially what B2B traditional industries are competing with now. And therefore, like you said, you may feel like if you have a small scope that you could keep up with that. But when you think about what you're facing in the marketplace,
right,
and how the game is changing, it's really difficult to stay competitive without making some changes in this area.
Well, something else you said that was really cool is that you're already doing this experimentation. Like you put this technology in place and you're starting to use it. Anytime you're negotiating prices, you're feeding the algorithm, right? You're feeding the model, the predictive model that's going to be used to determine elasticity, to determine recommendations, for example. And, to your point, if you think about competing against Amazon, well, Amazon, Google, these marketplaces have just tremendous amounts of data. And so, if they had big enough teams and savvy enough people, they could really give us all a run for our money, but they also are beholden to their clients, right? They want their clients to make more money. So there's this interesting dynamic of incentives going on here. But the bottom line is that you want to be able to track this information, to use it over time, and to really stay on top of what the pricing is, because it's a huge factor. I mean, the price, quality, ease of access, these are the basic tenets of sales, and price is a huge one, right?
Oh, it's absolutely huge. Yeah. I mean, people will consistently list it within the top maybe 3 reasons that they buy from somebody or not. If I can get my products reliably and at a good price, I'm going to keep coming back to you ultimately. So it's got to be part of the equation. And the fact is that if you roll the clock back 5-10 years ago, switching between one vendor and another or buying the same products from somebody else was more challenging. Now, I mean, literally, you could be, in a B2B environment or in our own personal lives, we see it. You're 1 or 2 clicks away from changing who you buy something from. There's so much competition out there, and the market is so much more dynamic and fast moving.
Well, and you also, maybe we could bring this in the next segment, but this thing called COVID came along, and all of a sudden there were some fantastic stories. I want to say, was it Target or one of these other big stores that flipped their entire model to curbside within like 30 days or something. And they were able to execute on that, I guarantee, because they had enough technology in place, managing the numbers, managing the workflow too. Maybe talk real quick before this break is over. Workflow is such an important part of the equation as well. What's your take on that, and how does it work with Zilliant?
Yeah, so in terms of workflow, I mentioned before the idea that if you think about all the friction, and we have a great slide that we sometimes show, basically says that there's triggers that you have in your environment, like inflationary changes or maybe supply shortages. Execs ultimately want to be able to quickly make a change in the business related to those triggers. And what we say, a lot of times what we say is, we have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, 5 years ago, it was the tariffs that we had. That was the biggest challenge that we faced. We had no idea of what was coming after that. We thought that was a challenge from a pricing perspective. So really handling and dealing with volatility requires agility, to your point. And when you have a very manual process that says, once the execs start to see what's happening in the business, We're going to need people to go gather data and pull it
Mhm.
together into a spot. We're going to have people from finance or other places do work to essentially build the strategy. We're going to have to try to execute that strategy across our sales force and our customer base. And those are all manual steps, and those are all high friction steps. You've lost that agility. And so I think that everybody, as they've been sort of seeing COVID, they've been seeing online selling, they've been subject to multiple price increases and inflationary cost increases through the year. They've realized the fact that, my ability to go from I've thought of a strategy, or I see a trigger that I want to react to, down to actually seeing a difference at the transactional level, whether that be a new or a different price, as an example, or a new or different offering. I think all companies are looking to compress that time frame significantly, so they can flip the pricing model as
Right.
quickly as possible. But there's a lot of challenges. Maybe something we could talk about later. There's a lot of challenges in their legacy pricing infrastructure in terms of being able to be agile like that.
It's very interesting. And you see it. I mean, people who pay attention when they go to the grocery store will see grocery stores are very clever in how they make it up, as is companies like Target. Like, I have a 9-year-old, and we go to the back of the store, and all of a sudden it's all this plastic crap. It's like $19. I'm like, $19 for this piece of plastic crap? What on earth are we doing here? But they're very clever, because they know you get the family back to the toy section, your daughter's going to get a toy of some kind, right? So it's really important to be able to understand where your profit's coming from, where you can quickly boost something to get a boost of profit, for example, or revenue. And all that comes from the data. And you're never going to be able to do that if you're just manually doing this in spreadsheets, right?
That's exactly right. It's always funny when you see like where the real buying dynamics are in your house. Yours sound very similar to mine in terms of who's really
in
the purse
charge.
strings. Yeah. And that's a good example. I think where within elasticity you would see that is as you are starting to move or raise the prices or change prices for those products over time, you'll see that volume really isn't changing that much as you move forward. And
Interesting.
Elasticity isn't necessarily about massive changes, 20 or 30 or 40% changes in price. It's continually seeing a signal in the market that says maybe I could get more price here, less price here, moving, seeing how the market responds to that. So pricing is not just it's moved from a less frequent, bigger moves kind of a discipline to just a much more living, continuous sort of experimentation, bring data in, see what you learn, and then make adjustments in an ongoing way.
That's very cool. And the other cool side I'll throw as our first break comes up here is that kind of intelligence really fuels the analysts who are responsible for making recommendations for your company. So you want to give those folks the tools they need, the data they need to make intelligent decisions. Well, don't touch that dial, folks. We're talking to Pete Eppley from Zilliant. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to Pete Eppley from the beautiful downtown office of Zilliant here in Austin, Texas. We're talking about pricing optimization, and the price has to be right, folks. I got to tell you, the pricing algorithm is right. That's what we want. We want the pricing algorithm to be watching all that stuff, making suggestions. So Pete had mentioned machine learning and AI, and I posit that the value from machine learning and AI will largely come, especially on the AI side, from suggestions. The AI is going to be tracking things, saying, hey, we noticed something. Why don't you raise this price, raise that price, take this action, take that action. That's going to be where a lot of this stuff comes out. And the machine learning side, machine learning is fantastic for crawling through massive amounts of data and finding the signal, making sense out of all this stuff. And we may get to ChatGPT before the show is over, but I said on the show last week, and just thinking about this stuff, ChatGPT can write sonnets for you, can write tweets, it can write papers for school, all this kind of stuff. That's in the English language. Well, all software is written in languages, whether it's Java or Scala or C++ or C# or whatever. It's all written in languages, HTML tags, for example. And the machine-to-machine communication that goes on between your computer and the cloud and all that stuff, I would argue is less complex than the English language, which means ChatGPT is going to be able to do some of that stuff too, which is crazy. But let's get back to Zilliant real quick. Price IQ and Sales IQ are two of the products. Tell us a bit about what they are and what they do.
Yeah, for sure. I'll start with Price IQ. Price IQ is our price optimization software that's we've been working on it. We first introduced it about 20 years ago. And the focus, as you'd imagine, is bringing that scientific approach to pricing. We had talked earlier about the fact that there are some businesses that are simple to understand. Maybe if you have dozens of products that you sell to dozens of customers, there's not a lot of complexity in pricing. But when you look at a distributor, take a distributor who sells, for instance, food products out to local restaurants. When you think about the fact that they have tens of thousands of products, they're selling to tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of customers, there is so much going on in terms of the data that comes up. And there's nuances within the context of how they work. I mean, as an example, and one example that we've given for years is when you think about soy sauce and the willingness to pay of a restaurant, it's going to be different for like an Asian restaurant that's a heavy consumer of soy sauce versus maybe a hotel that you might sell that to because of the importance of the product to them. So that's where AI and machine learning can come in, is to help understand and align the value of a given product to that customer. Because even though a product might have one cost when you procure it, it's going to have a different value to various customers in the market. And you want to make sure that you're aligned so that you have the best possible value proposition. And that's really what Price IQ does. It's a product that has some scientific capability built in, and then we also complement it with a science engagement where we'll work together with the customer to understand hypotheses that they have about their business. What drives pricing behavior? Is it local competition? Is it size of customer? Is it usage of product? And there could be a laundry list. Usually it's dozens of hypotheses that we test. And so we take what the business thinks drives price. We take what AI and machine learning tells us historically in their data has driven price, and we bring that together to create a solution.
That's really cool stuff. I mean, it really is fascinating. And I just think to myself, you look at some of the big giants like Google and Facebook and LinkedIn, these guys, and what they're doing these days are these micro releases. So they'll make some change to the architecture, to the layout, for example, but they'll only release it to like 0.1% of the sites because they're testing it, because they want to see, all right, what happens? Do we increase engagement? Do we lose audience? Do we increase click-throughs or whatever the case may be? And what you're talking about is very similar in terms of the pricing, because if you take the hypothesis of the business, okay, well, that's what you think, here's what this suggests, you can test across a sampling of your client base to see what happens. And with e-commerce, it's all about the data. It's all about how many people walked away from a cart, for example, or did the frequency of purchasing go down? All these different variables can be tracked over time. And then with the algorithms, that's when you can get these really clean recommendations and clean reporting on what happened, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in B2B, you've got this interesting world where you have sales reps, and it's been historically relationship based. And so versus just going to a website or a store shelf where you see a price, you make a decision. When you have a person involved, now all of a sudden you've got this unique blend of there's science and there's art and there's human emotion and human factor within the context of how those decisions are made. And so that's why it's important to have that collaborative process where people can test hypotheses and see what's actually shown up in their data or not. Like most any business you talk to, they would say, well, we always charge our bigger customers less than we charge our small customers for the same product. Not necessarily the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as you look to improve the pricing scenario in B2B, the people that are sellers in a B2B context don't necessarily just embrace technology. They're not saying, oh gosh, technology, AI, great, can't wait for just like Chat GPT. It's like, can't wait for this to come and change my world and give me recommendations, right? That's their value proposition in the organization. They're a seller, they know their products, they know their market, they have experience. And so they want to be able to think that they're in collaboration and this is helping them, not necessarily that this is something to tell them what to do or tell them what they've been doing wrong. So that's one thing that's very interesting, is a website doesn't have any emotion to it and a store shelf doesn't have the emotion. You just change the price, you run the experiment, and that's fine. So you can do that complementary. And to your point, I think a lot of this comes down to the AI, the technology also, and maybe Chat GPT can help with this, helping us explain to a sales rep why we made this conclusion or made this price change is because what we saw from in the data perspective, this is the analysis that came out of that drives to a different outcome or a different recommendation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm just guessing here that you've got global clients or clients that have regions all across the country, and regions are different culturally. They have different perceptions of pricing for certain products, for example, or the timing of certain products. So do you see your customers learning in the Southeast, for example, some tricks of the trade, and then being able to apply those in the Midwest? Is there something to be said for that?
We do see that. I think what you normally see and what you kind of come to expect is that people will feel like they're very different because I'm on a different piece of dirt.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like my market is very different than that person over there who's on a different piece of dirt, so to speak. And data can become the great equalizer in that case to show where there are similarities and where there are not. So as an example, proximity to a competitor's site, as an example, or proximity to a major city, regardless of what the major city is, may be more important determinant than if that's in the Southeast or if it's in the West, as an example. I mean,
Sure.
it could be, right? Not in all cases. There are certain products that certainly have a regional and a local kind of a feel to them, for instance. But that's the nice thing about data, is that I think the human mind can think about, a certain number of things and approaches things with some level of bias. And so it's nice to, when you're working with data and with people that are experts, to be able to bring that together. You can really kind of a lot of times identify things that maybe surprised you or weren't, the conventional wisdom within a company. And that's how you unlock opportunity.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And, kind of getting back to just the bigger picture here of managing price over time, the longer that you use this kind of technology, the more data you get, the easier it is to identify trend lines, for example, and go back and learn, well, how did we make more money? Well, it was this one particular product. We figured we had a lot of elasticity, so we just bumped it up and up and up. People kept buying it. Think fancy shoes, for example, that people like, or certain products that some people like, but some other people don't like. The key is to know where you've got the margin and where you've got the elasticity, and then be able to sort of map that across a global hierarchy. And that's a big part of the success, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think you really nailed it. And being able to do things like automate, we talk about in businesses, there's usually a long tail. You have you'll have a few products that are huge sellers and a lot of products that are smaller sellers. You have a few huge customers and a lot of smaller customers in that case. And your ability, when you continue to do this over a period of time and continue to refine your approach, you have the ability to automate the management of the long tail of your business to whether it's, even to the point, we've got a one customer we've been working with for many years who has automated the negotiation process for small deals that come in. They see as an example, 50,000 deals that come in from their distributor network every week. And they used to, in years past, they used to look at each and every one of those deals, whether it was a deal for $1,000 or $100,000. And you could imagine, you would sit in the room with the pricing people from that group, and they're checking their email the whole time because they're just stressed out because all these deals are just backlogging in their email. And you could imagine how much time they spend on each one of those deals when you've sat with them for an hour and they've had 10 or 15 or whatever pile up in their inbox. They're just checking them off. So what we did is we shifted them from a place where everything was a human review and manual review to a place where they would be able to actually evaluate deals and go as far as making a counter offer for a product without having any human intervention. So they were able to go basically from 100% human review to now only about 40% human review. And they spend their time in the business where it makes sense, on those deals where AI and machine learning maybe don't know everything that's going on, so they can guide versus being left alone to make the decision.
See, that is an excellent point that you just made, because when you can, we had a show, this is probably 7-8 years ago. I had a guy on a show, and I said, well, you shouldn't automate everything. He goes, oh no, you should automate everything that you can automate, right? Like, don't kid yourself. Like, you want to automate as much as possible. And so you mentioned, like, you have thousands of deals coming through. If a person looks at every one, man, that's your backlog right there, is the human being. The human being becomes the bottleneck, just manually going through the emails. So you see how much time you spend. And what's so cool about these technologies that are capturing data and allowing us to analyze data is that you can learn a lot about yourself, a lot about your business, a lot about your coworkers, just looking at the data to see, well, how much time are you spending on email? And now we have it in our phones, right? You have it in your phone. You spent this much time on Facebook, this much time on LinkedIn. It's like, did I really? Like, yeah, you did, because it was tracking you. And the unblinking eye knows, right? So that's a very cool story about figuring out how you can automate a chunk of the process that could be automated, that back and forth negotiation is not too complicated. Say, okay, offer like 10% less and see what they say. But you can also track when you lose the deals. And that's the key to me, is that you get the alert. Okay, you pushed it too far. You lost these 7 deals now. All right, go back and offer something else. That's really cool stuff. That's pretty innovative, right?
It's, yeah, very innovative. And I think one of the side benefits people don't necessarily expect or realize is it really gets you thinking about what your strategy is in the first place. Because I mean, there's maybe some mythology around AI and ML, like it's just going to figure out your strategy for you. Well, it's really not. It's going to help. It's going to help you identify patterns and things that are working or not working, but you've always got to lay your strategy on top of it. And so I think what's interesting in the transformation you see with people as they get more sophisticated with these systems, instead of just spending all their time bringing data together or try to make changes to a bunch of agreements, now they're spending more time thinking about what is our strategy, and when we're in a negotiation scenario, what are the things that we want to try to do? And then to your point, where there are questions, instead of just asking the loudest voice in the room what their opinion is, now you can actually start to run some data-driven experiments to see what's working in the market.
Right. Well, and the other good point you made there is that, look, if you automate a lot of these smaller deals that weren't getting you a whole lot of margin, they do get you some money. If you automate that, then your people can focus on the meatier deals that require more thought, more intelligence, more interactivity, maybe more research, for example. Because the fact is that, human beings, we all have our breaking points. And you mentioned these guys sitting in meetings, just going through, watching the deals stack up in their inbox. That puts pressure on you. And if there's too much pressure on you, you're going to change a decision. You're going to abandon something, or you're going to be rash about something. And so you're going to miss the bigger opportunity, which was this other deal that you didn't even get to because you're too busy just banging out the boring stuff. And the other point I'll make, and just get your commentary on here, is that, morale, I've always believed, is the #1 most important characteristic of any company. Because when morale is high, good things happen. When it's low, good things do not happen. And if you're taking the burden off of your ops people to do the tedious, boring stuff that's not really getting you much, you're improving the morale. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case, especially if you're giving them the opportunity to learn maybe new skills or elevate what they work on from a day-to-day basis. It's incredible when you start to have these strategic discussions about how should the counter offers and negotiation work. People around the table are leaning in, and they're excited about thinking about things in a new and a different way like that. And I think there's incredible opportunity and potential for people, and which, to your point, has a great impact on morale.
Yeah, and in our next segment, I think we'll dive further into roles and responsibilities and what we're really seeing. And I can tell you that from my experience, the impact of these forces kind of converging on us, whether it's the pandemic and the restrictions around that, tariffs that you had mentioned before, which predated all that, but also artificial intelligence, things like ChatGPT, machine learning. We're seeing business processes really collapsed and streamlined to where what did take 3 different people in 3 different departments is now taking 2 people in 1 department, or 1 person and just covering 3 different jobs. This is all happening right now. So digital transformation, as they call it, really involves process optimization, who's doing what and when, and things are changing. But don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, Eric Cavanaugh back here on Inside Analysis with Pete Eppley from Zilliant. We've been talking all about pricing optimization and AI, machine learning, and roles and responsibilities, and getting things done, frankly. And, when I think about what's happening, digital transformation, I see it myself. Salespeople are now more involved in marketing. Ops people are more involved in sales, for example. Sometimes you're getting this blending of historically discrete departments, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing primarily because we all need to understand what each other is doing. That's when you build camaraderie. That's when people feel good about what they're doing. And also there's a speed side of the equation. So let's talk about this quick start program that you guys have to kind of get things rolling, and maybe how that affects roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, for sure. So the quick start program that we have is something that we've developed and put a lot of time and effort into last year. And it was really a response from the marketplace for a couple of things. Number one, they said, inflation is crushing us.
Right.
And so what we would like is we'd like to see something that, can give me results as quickly as possible. And that laid down a great challenge for us. In our Quick Start program, we solve a problem for a customer within 4 weeks, so that if they, if they want to be able to pass inflationary increases through to their list prices, for instance, and their standard discount, they can do that in 4 weeks. If they want to get better tools in the hands of their sales reps to manage individual customer pricing, another thing that they could do within 4 weeks. So that was one of the things that was asked for. The other thing too is, for a lot of people, this is a massive change just in terms of how they go to market, how they think about things. And so they're not just looking, it's not like they necessarily have a perfectly clear vision of what they want to do, and they're just looking for a software solution to go make that happen. A lot of times they're looking for a partner or somebody to collaborate and bring best practices to the table to help them benefit from the experience of others. So really, the Quick Start program really essentially is both of those things, which is the ability for us to bring best practices in a prescriptive way and to do it very quickly to start helping companies who are feeling the pressure.
Yeah, and that also greases the tracks to get the ball rolling on something, right? And to show some value, land and expand, as we've said for years in these kinds of environments. But I think that one of my other really good friends in the business, actually, who helped start our radio career years ago, he has this awesome concept he threw at me one day, and I'll never forget this. He referred to the tyranny of urgency. And it's like, oh. You feel it, you're just like, and that's the guys in the meeting room. It's like 10 emails stacking up. You're like, oh, geez, am I going to get through this day? And if I understand it correctly, these quick starts, it'll be, a process for like 3-4 weeks, but then at least you're off and running with something and you can start seeing the results of that. And that's when people start to understand, people across the team, maybe the person, the CFO is scratching his head thinking, I don't know, or some savvy executive was saying that she doesn't think this is a good idea. Well, when you can show the results, that's when you can get somewhere, right?
Yeah, it can really be a game changer, because when you think about pricing and how it evolved in companies, especially on the pricing side, it's usually decades of, 5 years ago, we introduced this special kind of deal for these customers, and 10 years ago, and the accumulation of complexity a lot of times can be staggering. And so in some ways, in some respects, it's very healthy and refreshing for a company to almost consider starting new and not necessarily carrying over, because you could spend traditional projects like this, it's months and months and months of sitting around a room with all the experts and digging up every nook and cranny of everything that we've ever done. Are those things commercially beneficial to the company, all of them? Maybe not. Maybe they just evolved in a certain way. Now the company is, sort of depends and relies on that, but there's a good opportunity to change. And so that's where, we love the idea of an agile approach that says, take a good starting point and a good foundation. And we also build on top of that. We have a number of different extensions for people as they might want to go in different directions, but to do it in a more fresh and agile way is definitely what we recommend.
Yeah, and I was talking to some other folks at the company, and they were giving me some other good insights about white space opportunities. All of this concept. Talk about what you mean by a white space opportunity for sales.
For sure. So the analytical approach we bring to pricing, about maybe 12 years ago or so, we thought, gosh, we're doing a lot to bring analytics to the bottom line and to price and expand margin. What if we did the same thing in terms of understanding what a customer needs? So, which product should I be selling to a customer, as an example, and how could I grow revenue and top line? And so from the perspective of white space, the thought process was essentially that if I can connect the dots, because in pricing, what I do is I connect the dots with other customers who have similar willingness to pay, and then we establish what a market is. Same kind of an idea on the sales side and on the white space side, which is to say, I can connect the dots based on looking at you as a customer and what you buy. I can connect the dots and bring you together with other similar customers. And what's interesting is traditional ways to do that are, you might look at things like SIC code as an example, or you might look at location, like we were talking about before. You think about a company like GE and what SIC code are they, and like trying to characterize them. That's such a maybe weak is the word, way to characterize somebody, is you have one way to be able to connect the dots, versus if I can look at you as a customer, if I can look at everything you've bought for 2 or 3 years, I can develop a much richer profile of who you are and what you buy and when you buy it. And I can start to connect you with other people in that way. And then from there, I can identify white space. So if there are categories of product that people that have similar buying patterns you are buying that don't, then I can start to offer that up to you. It's, it's technology, and I've worked with this kind of technology for now over, too long, like 25 years, but it's a similar kind of technology that, when you're on your Spotify or wherever else, and it's making suggestions, it's taking a look at, what is everything that you've listened to? What's everything other people have listened to? And where are there gaps in things that, where you're very similar to somebody, but there's a few things that they're into that you're not. It's that same kind of an idea in technology where you could build rich profiles based on behavior rather than demographics or firmographics. And so once we do that, we're identifying very specific opportunities to put in front of sales reps about the accounts that they sell to. Here's a product category that this customer should be buying that they're not today, as an example of that type of white space opportunity.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it also gives the salespeople and the executives some ideas, right? A lot of times we all have inherent bias in how we view the world, and kind of getting back to the AI and to a certain extent the machine learning, they're going to recommend things that you probably didn't think of. And I remember when Google started doing this with your Gmail, where it would just automatically suggest that you follow up on certain emails. I thought it was very good at what it suggested. I was kind of surprised, like, wow, that's pretty interesting. But the thing is, it helps you get remain aware of what's happening in your environment and give you suggestions, right? Like there's an old expression, man doesn't need to be taught so much as reminded. And I remind myself of that cliche very often, because you'll forget, you get off track, you get busy with something. But if you have the machines in the background just kind of watching and saying, hey, watch for this, watch for that, it can really help keep the salespeople and the executives engaged as well. What do you think?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's, and the thing that's interesting is that the amount of opportunity you can find is almost limitless. And so you could actually be in a position where you're overwhelming people. That's why, as you look for opportunities, what we like to do is stack rank based on value to, value to the company, and ultimately a lot of times value to the sales rep, because they'll be going after the things that are going to result in maybe a biggest commission potentially for them. And by keeping them focused to a list, that's another thing that can be very difficult to do. If you go in and analyze a customer, you might find an opportunity, but there might be 20, 30 opportunities that are bigger with different customers that you just couldn't get to. So by always combing through your customer base, looking for those opportunities, and then bubbling the most valuable opportunities up to the top and putting them in your inbox on Monday morning. That's what we have for a lot of sales reps that are working with that Sales IQ solution. They walk in on a Monday morning, they see the highest value opportunities, and then they start to plan their week around following up on those.
Yeah, and that's very, very clever. And one thing I always point out too is that sales, especially B2B sales and personal sales, it's heavily morale driven. And you know what drives up morale? Making sales. Like when they go like, yes, another sale, they get excited. So if you can build upon that, that's when you get momentum. When you get momentum, better things happen. You get new product lines or whatever. But it really helps, again, to have the machines in the background just suggesting things to you so you don't miss opportunities and you really stay on top of stuff. Real quick, what do you think?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And like we said before, there's an element of threat to this. I think that, when sales reps are getting opportunities, again, their value proposition is, I understand my customer base. I know what's going on. I know who's leaving me. I know where I've got opportunities. And so you have to be able to do it in a way where you introduce those suggestions and recommendations, but there's also an ability for reps to be able to override the situation.
Right.
Like, I'm going to dismiss this one. There's something going on that you don't see, and I'm going to tell you what it is here.
Right.
So the ability, like you said, instead of it being a something that's dictated to them, the ability for them to essentially have a budget or a process that says, these are things that I can take off my plate because I know things that you don't. That makes it much more collaborative kind of a situation. And it's sort of seen as a help to them rather than potentially a threat.
That's exactly right. Well, folks, we've been talking to Pete Eppley of Zilliant. Look them up online, zilliant.com. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.